So
We throw back.
I meet people who have Parkinson's and have had it for years and have no idea what's happening. They don't understand why their brains are doing what they're doing. They don't understand why the symptoms are so confusing. They sometimes think Parkinson's is doing stuff that Parkinson's cannot do, and therefore they fail to go to doctors that they ought to go to. It's very frustrating for people. It's not like every other disease, because every other disease isn't like every other disease either. Every disease is unique. Every disease has its own challenges. The challenge with Parkinson's is that we really don't have any idea what the pattern of progression is going to be. No one knows. Some people, like me, I lost my sense of smell almost immediately. Can't smell anything. It's terrible to go to a chili cook-off. Can't smell chili. I loved barbecue all my life, and now it's just like eating paste. You can't smell anything. It's really frustrating. I've got friends who have had Parkinson's for 25 years and still have a perfect sense of smell. It makes no sense to me. I have friends who have had Parkinson's for 3 years and can't hear or can't talk. I can hear fine and talk fine. For some reason, my brain has chosen to give up smell and keep hearing. It's a deal that I'm willing to accept. I can take that because hearing is more important than smell. But you never know what's going to happen with you. The number of symptoms is immense. There are more than 40 identified symptoms for Parkinson's. You will not have all of them. I'm on a couple of Facebook groups, and every now and then somebody will come on the group and they'll say, well, I've been to the doctor and I have all the symptoms. And I say, no, you don't. No one has all the symptoms, trust me. No one ever gets all the symptoms. If you lived to be 100 with Parkinson's, you would not get all the symptoms, because everyone's situation is different. And that's one of the things that puzzled me about it when I was first diagnosed. What is going on? I'm used to something like a cold, where everybody gets the same symptoms. Even the people I know who have had cancer, it's a fairly standard pattern of what you see. My mother has had both knees replaced. Anybody had their knees replaced? It's a standard operation. It's the same for everybody. The doctors even talk about it that way. But Parkinson's is different for everybody. It's different for everyone who gets it. It's different for everyone in terms of how long it will take for them to progress. I hate that it's a progressive disease, which means it gets worse. They say it's progressing. What it means is it's getting worse for me, because I am not progressing. The disease is progressing. But I don't know what's going to be next. And that's frustrating for me, and I think it's frustrating for a lot of people. We're told about this thing called the Parkinson's iceberg. You've probably seen this image before. You know, have an iceberg, and just above the iceberg are the 4 things they diagnose you on, which is tremor, muscle rigidity, bradykinesia, and postural instability. Bradykinesia is slow movement. And those are the things everybody sees. Anyone here ever have someone say to you, you don't look like you have Parkinson's? And the answer you want to tell them, because you want to be a smart aleck, is just what exactly do you think it looks like to have Parkinson's? I've never heard anyone say to someone, you know, you don't look diabetic. You don't look like you have cancer. There is no look to Parkinson's. There's an idea in people's heads, but there's no look. Think of all the symptoms that people have, some of which people in this room will have. We have symptoms like the loss of smell. We have anxiety. We can have depression. We can have urinary problems. We can have constipation problems. We can have weird dreams. How many people here have violent, vivid dreams? Very common in Parkinson's. And there's nothing you can do to stop. You can take some medicine. I take clonazepam. It helps a great deal. But you can't do away with them because it's a Parkinson's symptom. But there are people with Parkinson's who don't have bad dreams. There are people with Parkinson's who don't have any trouble sleeping, because Parkinson's varies from person to person. That's very frustrating to me. And then I came to understand this. Parkinson's is a control problem. Okay? There's not a problem with your hand because you have a tremor. I have a friend who's had Parkinson's for 18 years and has never had a tremor. But he's been diagnosed for 18 years, and he's even had DBS. but he's never had a tremor. Because not everyone gets tremor. Everyone gets a different set of things because it is a control problem. The problem for us is that our brains are no longer able to adequately control our bodies. That's the problem. The fact that your foot is curling up is not a problem in your foot. The fact that you're having dystonia in your hand is not a problem in your hand. What's a problem is in your brain and in your nervous system. That's why it differs from person to person. Because how the problems manifest are entirely unique, and they don't copy each other. So asking someone, I've got this, does anyone else have that, is sort of useless. Because the fact that someone else has it isn't really important to you. That you have it is important to you. Someone will say, well, I've got the following symptoms. What stage am I in? And the answer is, who cares? Doctors don't care what stage you're in. They treat you. You don't care what stage you're in. You care about your treatment. So we think of Parkinson's as a control problem. The problem is twofold. First is the death of the cells in the substantia nigra. The second is the creation of what are called Lewy bodies, which are misfolded groups of alpha-synuclein proteins plus other things they attract, which are killing nerve cells. They are killing nerve cells all over your body. That's what Parkinson's is. When they do an autopsy of a person and to determine whether they have Parkinson's, they look first for Lewy bodies. And if they find Lewy bodies in the substantia nigra, that person had Parkinson's. They look for the loss of the substantia nigra. And it's believed by many people that the death of the cells in the substantia nigra are caused by the alpha-synuclein misfolding, which causes Lewy bodies. But there's a lot of issues going on here. So let's talk about it. The substantia nigra, I've got a picture for it, but they won't have that for you for a little while. They're going to print it out and give it to you. The substantia nigra are two smears of black cells. It's called substantia nigra because they were discovered when the Greeks were doing biopsies or autopsies way yonder long ago in the BCs, and they saw this black stuff on the basal ganglia, so they called it black stuff, which is what substantia nigra means. It's a very complicated term. There's also something called the locus coeruleus, which by the way means blue spot, which is another thing in the brain which is affected in Parkinson's. They just called it what they saw. It's called black stuff. The substantia nigra is on both sides of the basal ganglia at the very base of your brain. Your spine comes up into your brain area and your brain fits over it. That's the basal ganglia. It fits over the top of the spine. The substantia nigra then is these two little sets of black cells. They're very small. They're like 1/5 of an inch thick, like an inch long, and they make almost all the dopamine that your brain uses. They're very important. And we've known since the early 1900s that the substantia nigra is disappearing in people with Parkinson's. For years, we did not do autopsies in the West. And then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we started doing autopsies. And when they started doing autopsies, they found that the substantia nigra was disappearing in people with Parkinson's. If you look at a picture from an autopsy of a normal control, you'll see a basal ganglia and two nice black smears on the side. The Parkinson's version will have almost no black cells at all because the cells have died. Because those cells are dying, you do not have enough dopamine. We don't have enough dopamine. They make your dopamine, especially the dopamine that's used in your intentional movements, your movements, and especially your autonomic movements. So your brain loses its ability to control because it doesn't have enough material to send out its messages. Dopamine is what's called a neurotransmitter. When your brain wants to send a thought, it sends it, it goes down the nerve signals, the nerve cells, down the reaches of the nerve cell, in dopamine, and it crosses over the synapse to the next nerve cell. If you don't have enough dopamine, you can't get the message to the next cell. If the next cell doesn't have enough dopamine, it can't, if it gets the message, send it on its way. So the messages aren't clear. This loss of dopamine is throughout your life as a person with Parkinson's. You will start with about 400,000 cells in the substantia nigra. By the time you're diagnosed with Parkinson's, you may have 160,000 left. 60% will be gone before you can be diagnosed based on physical symptoms. Some movement disorder specialists say as much as 80% will already be gone. You already don't have enough dopamine. That's why you're having symptoms. Dopamine is necessary all through your day. When you're sleeping, you're building up your dopamine reserves because you make it 24/7. And as soon as you get up, you start burning it. You burn it when you exercise. You burn it when you move. You burn it when your heart beats. Everything your brain does uses dopamine at some level. So as you go through your day, the amount of dopamine you have gets less and less. It's stored in little things called vesicles at the synapses, but the vesicles can no longer store it because there's not any to store. And when the messages get there, they can't be sent. So you're going to have trouble. One of the things Parkinson's people have trouble with is body temperature. Anybody here ever have cold waves or hot waves? You feel hot when it's not hot. You feel cold when it's not cold. Parkinson's does that. It'll change your blood pressure. I used to take a ton of high blood pressure medicine. Now I take very little high blood pressure medicine because my body cannot maintain my blood pressure anymore the way it used to. Eventually, I will probably have to take medicine to increase my blood pressure because it's going down. All these things happen because the brain's automatic control systems fail because you don't have enough dopamine to do the things you want to do. When you do something that's very exciting, you burn more dopamine. So for example, tonight, after I make this presentation, I am going to crash and burn because I am going to be dopamine lost. I preach on Sunday mornings, and my wife will tell you, Sunday afternoons, I am crashed and burned because it takes a lot of energy. Everything you do uses part of that dopamine. So through the day, you're going to feel good, and you're going to feel bad, and then you're going to feel okay, and then you're going to feel terrible, and then you're going to feel great because the dopamine changes. You can no longer make enough dopamine. So you say, well, why don't you just take some dopamine? That would seem like a nice thing to do. But dopamine cannot be taken and get into your brain. There's a thing called the blood-brain barrier. It's a series of endothelial, I know everyone knows what endothelial are, endothelial cells which fill the blood vessels that go into and out of the brain so that nothing can get into the brain to hurt the brain. That's why when you get a cold, it doesn't get into your brain. That's why when COVID could get into the brain, because sometimes COVID could sneak past the endothelial barrier, it caused a lot of trouble because the brain is protected from these things by the blood-brain barrier. Dopamine cannot get through the blood-brain barrier, ever. So if you take dopamine, it will not help your Parkinson's. The fact that you have dopamine working in your body is of no good use to you as Parkinson's. You do use dopamine in your body. You use it in your kidneys, you use it in your digestive tract, you use it all over your body. But you can't get it into your brain. So when you see a jar, a bottle of supplements and it says dopamine, don't buy it. All you're going to do is put dopamine in your body, and it's not going to help your Parkinson's anyway because it can't help your Parkinson's. But they figured out something in the 1960s. There is a chemical called levodopa, which your body actually makes. So while you're sitting here now, your body is making levodopa. It does it naturally from a thing called tyrosine. Levodopa is turned into dopamine. It has a little addition on it called a carboxylase element, and if you chop the carboxylase element off, it becomes dopamine. And there is an enzyme in your body called the AAAD enzyme whose entire purpose in its existence is to chop the carboxylase element off of levodopa and turn it into dopamine. That's why it's in your body. It works all the time. So when you take levodopa, your body immediately begins to convert it into dopamine. It will convert it into dopamine as soon as it gets into your bloodstream because the AAD enzyme is in your blood. It will find that levodopa and it's going to chop those carboxylase elements off of it. It's called a decarboxylase enzyme. And because the enzyme will cross the blood-brain barrier, and levodopa will cross the blood-brain barrier, then when levodopa and the enzyme meet in your brain, you get dopamine. That's how it works. It's not a medicine in the normal sense of the term. It's just something that turns into dopamine. And that's all that it does. So what you're doing when you take it is you're getting yourself extra dopamine. So you take it for that purpose. Now, we mix it with something called carbidopa. The reason is when they discovered levodopa could be used orally, they also found out that it made people really, really sick. If you take levodopa without carbidopa or benserazide, which is what they use in Europe, you will get sick as you can be. Because your body, your stomach does not want to take levodopa. So they mix it with carbidopa. Carbidopa helps destroy the nausea that's created by levodopa, and carbidopa is an enzyme inhibitor. It slows down the ability of AAAD to convert levodopa into dopamine. So it lasts longer in your system. More of it gets to your brain, and since carbidopa will not get into your brain, that means that the levodopa gets into your brain with AAD being unaffected, and you get more results. So if you take carbidopa levodopa, then 5% or more of the levodopa will get into your brain and turn into dopamine. If you take levodopa without carbidopa, 1% or less will get into your brain. So when someone says to you, take this Mucuna pruriens, it's a plant that grows in Africa, and it's got lots of levodopa in it, and they grind it up into a powder and sell it as a supplement. If you take that instead of levodopa, that's fine, but only 1% of it's going to get to your brain anyway, because you don't have carbidopa with it. There's a doctor in the Netherlands who has a lot of patients who want to take this medicine as opposed to taking levodopa that's made in the drug companies. So he gives them carbidopa to take with their Mucuna pruriens so that they can still get some of it into their blood system, because it'll help them work better. They're handing out the sheets here of the thing. Let me see if I can point you to the page I wanted to look at. If you look about, I don't know what page you'll hand me one of them. Let's see what I've got here. I'll print two at a time. Oh, goodness. Oh, you printed like every fifth page.
Every fifth page?
It looks like it. Page
We'll look at it for us. For
1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8.
Well, we'll know what's wonderful.
10,
for
11,
us. But
okay.
I'll tell you what she did. She was attempting to make them bigger for us.
Oh.
So we can email out the slideshow.
There we
to
go.
everybody.
I was going to show you the picture of the substantia nigra. But, so that's why we take carbidopa levodopa. If levodopa does not help you, and there is a percentage of people with Parkinson's that levodopa will not help, then they do have other medications you can use. They have what are called dopamine agonists, which pretend to be dopamine, but are not dopamine. And they have medicines that will stop other things in the brain from interfering with what your dopamine can do. They have various things you can do. But levodopa is the gold standard for medication because it replaces the thing that you're missing, which is the dopamine. So then the question is, why in the world are these cells dying? Why is substantia nigra passing away? Have you got some with 3 on it? You got one there with 3?
Yes.
Because what we've got don't have all the pages.
It does.
No. It only has 2 per page, and so it skips like every 3rd and 4th one.
Yes, we're going to email that slideshow.
That's good. Just to let you know. Okay. So here's the thing. No one really knows yet why the cells are dying in the substantia nigra. We wish they knew, because then they could stop it maybe, but they really don't. But they're beginning to get the idea that what's causing the death of the cells are the same things that are causing these Lewy bodies. Now, Lewy bodies were discovered in the 1910s by a man named Frederick Lewy. He discovered them, cut them open, and saw what they were. He couldn't figure out what was in them because they didn't have enough technology then. But he discovered that people with Parkinson's had Lewy bodies throughout their nervous system. And that became a hallmark for what marked someone with Parkinson's disease. The Lewy body, as it turns out, is made up primarily of a protein called alpha-synuclein. Now, alpha-synuclein is a very, very big-time protein. 1%, they say, of all the protein in the brain is alpha-synuclein, which they say is a lot, because there are lots of different proteins in the brain. Alpha-synuclein exists in the nerve cells throughout your body. Normally, it's a fairly straight protein, and it does a lot of things. They're not really sure what all it does. But it's a very important protein in the body. For some reason, and they don't really know why, in some people, the protein begins to bend, to fold. Instead of being straight, it folds. And the fold is what causes the problem. Because it folds, it no longer flows through the cell the way it's supposed to. Cells, of course, are liquid. Everything in a cell is moving around in this viscous fluid that's the cell. Because it's folded, it doesn't move like it's supposed to move, and it attaches itself to other folded alpha-synucleins. Once they start to fold, they keep folding. And they form together into groups called oligomers. I know everybody wants to know oligomers. They form groups called oligomers, which are little piles of misfolded alpha-synuclein. Because it's a little clump in the middle of the cell, it attracts other things. So mitochondria, which is the way cells get their energy, will be attracted and attach itself to this little oligomer of alpha-synuclein. The oligomers will then stick together, and they will form what's called a fibril, which is a long chain of these lumps. And what these things then do is they attract everything else in the cell. The lysosomes and everything in the cell, the Golgi matter, everything that makes the cell work. All the things that make a cell able to move, all the things that make a cell able to hold its shape, all the things that gives a cell power, all the ability that gives a cell to communicate with other cells. All of these things are attracted to and become attached to these alpha-synucleins. They are called aggregates because everything aggregates into these alpha-synucleins until they form what's called a Lewy body. And if you see a picture, I don't know if the picture of the Lewy body is in your material. If you look at the page that's 14, you can see a picture of what a Lewy body looks like. This is a Lewy body in a nerve cell on autopsy, of course, because that's when you get to see Lewy body. And you can see the cell, and in the upper right-hand side of the cell, you can see the cell nucleus, and in the middle of the cell, you can see a circle. That circle is a Lewy body. Now, the first thing that strikes most of us when we see it is how big the darn thing is. It's getting bigger. They always get bigger because they attract more things. They block the cell from being able to transmit things within the cell, transfer things, and they attach themselves more and more to the Lewy body. A Lewy body will grow and grow, and there will be more than one Lewy body in a cell. So that in a nerve cell, you could have 3 or 4 or 6 or 8 Lewy bodies in a single cell. All of them absorbing all the things that make the cell able to work. Until eventually, the cell dies. They have shown without any question that alpha-synucleins and Lewy bodies are connected to cell death. They're not sure how the causation works, but when they do an autopsy of a person with Parkinson's, they will find what's left of the substantia nigra, and every nerve cell in that substantia nigra will contain a Lewy body. It's where they occur. Because of these Lewy bodies, all the cells are dying in the substantia nigra. They're not all dead yet. When you get a new cell, it's all healthy and happy. Sadly, alpha-synuclein that is misfolded can travel from one cell to another. They're called extracellular alpha-synuclein. They can move from one cell to another. So that when a cell has these in it, it can poison other cells, causing them to have the same problem. So most of you have probably heard about the skin test that they do. They do a skin test called the SIN1 test, where they're testing for whether you have Lewy bodies in your body. They take 3 samples. They take one from the back of the neck, one from just above the side of the knee, and one from just above the side of the ankle. They're like 3-millimeter punches that they do, punch biopsies, where they take dermis and epidermis, and in the dermis, they can find misfolded alpha-synucleins. They put them into a mixture of healthy alpha-synucleins that they've created. You can go online and figure out how to buy them if you wanted to, I guess. They're pretty expensive. And as soon as you put a misfolded alpha-synuclein into a cell with healthy alpha-synuclein, they begin causing other alpha-synucleins to fold. So this cell death is the problem. Most of the current research to try to get a vaccine against Parkinson's is aimed at this material, at this alpha-synuclein. They are testing things to stop it from moving from one cell to another, so that when one cell gets it, that cell may die, but the other cells won't die. They're trying to get things that will stop it from misfolding in the beginning. They have all manner of things that they're trying to do to stop the alpha-synuclein problem from continuing. But at this point, they can't stop it. There's an astonishing amount of research being done trying to get this to happen. If you look at page 19 on your handout, you'll be able to see it very clearly. If you get your magnifying glass, you can look at it. This is actually a chart. People say, well, why isn't there more research being done into Parkinson's? This is a chart of all the open research, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, in Parkinson's medicines in January of 2023. That's a lot of medicines. A phase 1 study is a safety study. They're giving the drugs to people to see if it'll kill them. Phase 2 is an efficacy study. They give the study to a small number of people who have the disease to see if it does any good. Phase 3 is a large study and will normally take 2 or 3 years to complete. But if you look at the chart, you'll see that there are a lot of things being tested. The upper half of the chart, which has DMT on it, these are all disease-modifying therapies. These are all things that they are researching in order to change the disease, to stop it from getting worse, to stop it from spreading, to stop any other generations from getting it. The bottom half of the chart are symptom therapies. These are things being studied to treat the symptoms, which is all they can treat right now. The top half of the chart is all stuff we're hoping they'll one day be able to treat. The bottom half of the chart, a lot of that is stuff that we can already use. So what I'm telling you is here's what's happening in your body. Your brain, because it has too little dopamine, can no longer issue the controls that it used to issue. It can no longer tell your heart to beat at the right rate. It can no longer maintain your blood pressure and your digestion and your heart rate and all the things that it does, because everything your body does is controlled by your brain. All those autonomic things that you learned about in school, where they happen automatically, your brain does all those things automatically. And those are the first things that become a problem. The first 3 things they say that they can see that will tell you that someone is going to have Parkinson's is REM sleep behavior disorder, which is the active dreams and kicking and all that when you're sleeping, loss of a sense of smell, and constipation. As one movement disorder specialist put it, if I see someone and they're 40 years old and they've got REM sleep behavior disorder, constipation, and no smell, that's a person that's going to have Parkinson's one day. Because there's nothing else that causes all 3 of those things. But you can't say that it's Parkinson's yet because they don't meet the criteria for Parkinson's. It's what they now call prodromal Parkinson's, early Parkinson's. Those people are used in studies. When you find those people, they like to study them because they're trying to figure out a way to stop Parkinson's from happening to people. Parkinson's then is this huge disease which stops your ability to control. So why do you get a tremor? You get a tremor because the part of your brain that controls your hand can no longer be properly communicated with by your brain. Your brain actually has a system where it tells your body to move and it tells your body not to move. Remember, there's only two things your nerves can do. They're either on or off. A nerve can't sit there and kind of be off and then come on. They're either on or off. So there's always something wanting your hand to move. And there's always something in your brain telling it not to. When your brain wants it to move, your brain balances these things so it'll go where you want it to go. But you lose the ability to control that because the brain doesn't have enough dopamine to control it anymore. That's why you get a tremor. That's why levodopa will treat tremor, because it'll add enough dopamine so that your body can control those things for most people. Your brain is doing so many things, but as its cells die, and it's these dopamine creating cells that die, it's not your memory that's dying, it's not like Alzheimer's, it's not like vascular dementia where parts of your brain are dying. These are nerve cells that are dying. As these nerve cells die, your brain can no longer send the commands and your body can no longer receive the commands. They can find alpha-synucleins and Lewy bodies in your ankle. That just amazes me. It's not just in my brain. It's all through my body. It's in the nerves that control my digestive system. It's in the nerves that control my eyes. They are everywhere in your body, but they are focused on the substantia nigra. That's what makes it Parkinson's. So your brain can't communicate well, and your body can't hear the messages from the brain. How many of you have numbness in your hands or your feet? Because your body can't communicate anymore. Your brain doesn't cause numbness. It's that the nerve is no longer able to communicate because of the Lewy bodies which mess up the nerve system. And so you end up with numbness. It's a serious condition to deal with. When we face Parkinson's, we have to understand that. So they'll say, what are the things you're supposed to do with Parkinson's? One thing you got to do is you just got to deal with the fact that you got it. It's not going to go away. You're not going to wake up one morning and your substantia nigra is going to go, oh, sorry, I was asleep. I'll get back to work now. You've got the condition. But there are things you can do. They tell us to exercise. How many people here like to be told to exercise? I hate being told to exercise. I had PT and OT today. It about killed me. We don't like being told to exercise. Here's what exercising does. It's not because it makes your muscles stronger. That's not really the thing you're doing it for. In Parkinson's, what it does is it affects your brain. When you exercise, your brain creates new nerve cells. Your brain creates new connections within the nervous system. These cells do not have Lewy bodies in them because they're new. Now they're going to get them eventually because that's what Lewy bodies do. But as you create these new cells, you are able to do more things longer because it takes a while for these things to develop and bother you. I tell you, I've got friends who have had Parkinson's more than 20 years and are still living full lives because they take care of themselves. I know people who've had Parkinson's for 3 years and are doing nothing but sitting at home watching television. You have to choose what you're going to do. So you exercise your brain. You do the things that you're required to do mentally. You do the things you have to do physically. It's not always fun to do. I've always hated exercising. I still hate exercising. But it's just something that you have to do. Because otherwise you're just stuck. They are researching all these things. They are researching ways to stop alpha-synuclein from folding. The biomarker that the Michael J. Fox Foundation found is, in fact, alpha-synuclein. They take it out of your spinal cord. They can find how much alpha-synuclein you have misfolded in your spinal cord. The way they do it is actually kind of cool. They take it out and they put it in a bunch of healthy stuff and see how many bad ones develop. Because if bad ones develop, it's because you had bad ones in what they took out of you. That's how they find them. And then they can actually see them on a fluoroscope. They can see that there's bad ones in there. It takes a while to get the results, but they can find out how many you have. They believe that how many you have in those samples will tell them how advanced your condition is. Because as it becomes more advanced, you have more and more of it. So Parkinson's is serious. It's not going away. But on the other hand, it's not going to kill you tomorrow. Parkinson's is a long-term disease. It took years for your substantia nigra to get to the stage where you could be diagnosed. It will take years for it to get to the stage where it's going to be a serious problem if you take care of yourself, for most people. Now, be very careful to take advice from people that know what they're doing. And I'm not a doctor, so take advice from your doctors. But Parkinson's is not something to play with. It's very important. I'll see people on these Facebook groups and they'll say, I've had Parkinson's for 5 years and I'm doing terribly now, but I don't take any medicine. Well, guess what? That's why you're doing terribly now. If you're not going to do what they give you to do to help you, it's going to get worse. But anyway, any questions anybody's got? Everybody says, you blew me away now. Can't do that.
Jimmy, say we have Lewy bodies in our body.
Yeah.
Lewy body dementia is such a horrible disease. Is there any relationship between Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia?
There is, only in the sense that they have Lewy bodies. Because the alpha-synucleins are the problem, there are diseases they call synucleinopathies. So Parkinson's, Lewy body dementia, and multisystem atrophy, I think is the term, are all all have alpha-synuclein problem. The Lewy body dementia difference is this. With Parkinson's, most of the Lewy bodies are found in the substantia nigra. With Lewy body dementia, they're found up here. They're found in the cortical part of the brain, which is where memory is. So dementia with Lewy bodies exists because the Lewy bodies are in a different place. That's why it's diagnosed usually within a year. If you get physical symptoms of Parkinson's and within a year you have serious mental issues with Parkinson's, then they will often diagnose that as dementia with Lewy bodies. Because it takes longer for the Lewy bodies to expand up into the cortical areas if you have Parkinson's. Parkinson's disease dementia results from them expanding up into the cortical area. But there is that connection. Oh, by the way, Alzheimer's also has Lewy bodies, but they're not quite sure why. Anything else? Everybody says, I don't want to talk about this.
Just a question. You said Parkinson's disease can affect your heartbeat?
Yes.
Okay. Because 2 weeks, my last 2-3 weeks, my heartbeat went up.
Yeah.
Last week I was in emergency. So my heartbeat was 150.
Oh, wow.
70 should be max, like 70, 75. So they admitted me, they gave me a shock and brought it back to the thing.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out why, because I never had a problem. All of a sudden, possible because of Parkinson.
It is possible. Now, here's the key though. He's talking about his heart rate. His heart rate went way up. And that can happen. It can also go way down.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Parkinson's is not a shield. You absolutely have to understand this. Parkinson's does not protect you from anything. You can still get cancer. You can still get arthritis. You can still get cardiological problems. When you have a physical problem, do not assume that it's Parkinson's. Assume that it's not. And go see the doctor you need to go see. I asked my movement disorder specialist, Dr. Morgan, that in my first diagnosis. I said, who should I see? See whoever you would normally see. If you've got pain in your knee, go see a doctor you would see about your knee. If he can't figure out what the problem is, then we'll look at whether it's Parkinson's. I've had surgery on my neck, I've had surgery on my eyes, I've had all kinds of surgery since my Parkinson's diagnosis. They were problems that a lot of people thought would be Parkinson's, but they weren't. They were, spinal problems or other problems. Don't sit around and assume that it's Parkinson's. Parkinson's is not a shield. It doesn't protect you from anything. A good friend, an acquaintance of mine who's a fellow ambassador for Davis Finney, he'd had Parkinson's for a lot of years. I met him last September at a conference up in Minnesota. He passed away just a couple of weeks ago, from cancer. Years of Parkinson's, but he passed away from cancer. Because you can get anything, so, yeah.
Are hiccups a symptom of Parkinson's? I'll bet you I didn't hiccup 3 times in my entire adult life. I hiccup all the time
You should check with your doctor. I suspect it could be. I yawn all the time. And I thought yawning was just a dopey thing, and then I found a 2020 study that said yawning is a significant problem for people with Parkinson's. And I thought, great, yawning. That's the symptom I wanted to have.
So we just saw Dr.
I think we're gonna have to get out of here soon. We've got to get these people going. Yeah.
So,
He's a genius.
The levodopa and the partner, you said was carbidopa?
Yep.
Are they, can one expect anything to get better, or is it just kind of slow down the progression?
It doesn't even slow the progression, but it's a symptom treatment. He's asking about carbidopa, levodopa, and what it does. In Parkinson's, on the chart I showed you, there's disease-modifying treatments and symptom treatments. There are currently no disease-modifying treatments. They cannot slow down the death of the cells in your brain. There's nothing they can give you that will slow it down or make it go away. But they can change how it impacts your life. So what carbidopa, levodopa does is it makes the symptoms less severe. So, for example, when I was diagnosed, I was having trouble typing because of my tremor. But with my carbidopa, levodopa, I can type again. I can do the things I need to do. I can drive, I don't have that issue. If I don't take it, I get the issue again. Because it treats the symptom, but it does not delay the disease. The only evidence for anything that will delay the disease is exercise. And there actually is good evidence that cycling, in particular, and treadmill exercises can slow the progression of Parkinson's. There's a study called the SPARKS-2 study, and there's a current study called SPARKS-3. The SPARKS-3 study, which is expected to be out in another year or two, is expected to really establish that cycling in particular, treadmills in particular, can be used to slow the progression because of the neuroplasticity, because it creates all these new connections in the brain. Then those new connections are healthy.
I heard the person say that exercise is not the best thing for Parkinson's. It's the only thing.
It's the only thing you can do. It's the only thing we currently have to hope that it's going to slow down the disease is exercise. The sad thing is that prior to 2000, Parkinson's people were told not to exercise. They were told by doctors that they were not to exercise. That exercise would wear you out, that it gave you too much stress, that it would make your symptoms worse, which was ridiculous. But it was based on the opinions of a guy who wrote in 1899 a book about Parkinson's called Sir William Bowers, and he said they needed to go home and rest. A French doctor from the 1870s had said, go home and exercise. But he got blown out by the English guy. So for years, Parkinson's people were told to go home. But it's not what we're told anymore. Anyway, yeah.
This is just a comment that I just remember Dr. Morgan telling my mom was, you don't die of Parkinson's. Nobody dies of Parkinson's, it's of something else. And that just always was a fact to me.
And so and part of the exercise is to avoid the other things. The things one of the movement disorder specialists that I listened to said there are 3 main things that kill people with Parkinson's: falling, aspirating, and hallucinations. And they kill you because they take you to the hospital. And the hospital is the last place people with Parkinson's want to be. If you've been in a hospital with Parkinson's, you know this, they will not give you your medicine on time. They just won't. You have to sneak it in and take it yourself. But falls, you help prevent falls by getting in better shape, by controlling your balance, by doing the exercising. You can avoid aspiration by working your throat and doing your voice exercises. I do voice exercises because you've got to keep your voice strong. You've got to be able to be heard. And hallucinations, well, when they come, you just got to deal with them. But they do have medicines for hallucinations too. All right, I think we're going to have to get you out of here. Sorry I didn't give y'all more time to talk. Yeah.
I always felt like the sleep issue, and that there needs to be more research on the sleep issue. And while Joy and I were just talking, I said, what about a little swaddle, you know, they do for babies, why can't they do something like that for Parkinson's? And would that help them? Because then they couldn't have all the REM disorder.
Oh, no, but the trouble with the REM disorder is when you sleep, your body paralyzes.
Right.
Because you don't have enough dopamine anymore and your brain can't control your body, you don't paralyze when you sleep. So when you dream that you're running, you run. When you dream that you're hitting, you hit. Some people, when they dream that they're screaming, they scream. And swaddling is not going to affect that. Now, if you, basically what you're talking about is tying them up.
No, actually, there's this big swaddling that she's talking about, that's very strange, that allows you to go ahead and sleep.
Yeah.
So you can sleep.
It would,
You can stay.
Have they tried that one?
they probably, it sounds like something you would do for the person you're sleeping with, so that you don't hit them. Because that's what you're really, I don't think it would affect the person with Parkinson's because the dream is still gonna be what the dream is. The REM sleep behavior disorder, for many people, and certainly for me, is not really an issue for me. I have horrible dreams, but I just live with the horrible dreams. But the fact that I'm swinging or talking doesn't bother me because I'm asleep. It bothers her.
But
It
as
does.
soon as it bothers her, she has to
Yeah.
wake you up to keep from getting drowned, or because you think she's drowning. You
But you
know.
can, yeah, and a lot of
But
people.
if he could stay
Yeah.
asleep, I'm with Kenny on that.
Yeah.
If he could stay asleep, that would improve his sleep.
It certainly, I've never heard of it being used, but it's certainly something you can think of.
I think it's a good job.
All right, we gotta get going because we're gonna have people, we gotta get them out of here. So, thank y'all for coming. Next month we'll be meeting Elizabeth French Coleman will come and speak on medications.